Hello, Jeff Rolke here. Thank you for checking out my video, one of my favorite segments, questions from comments. Number 35, we've got some really cool questions that I've found in the comments. Thank you for sharing your thoughts and your questions with me. I truly appreciate it. It is literally what makes these videos, these questions from comments videos, possible because they are, of course, your questions. I am going to dive right in. Thank you if you've chosen to subscribe. It really helps the channel. And quite frankly, this time of year can be really challenging for us creators in terms of subscribers and things like that. So whether it's me or someone else that you watch regularly, consider subscribing now. It really does help the channels. Moving right into our questions. These first two go together. I'm a long-time user and appreciator of your baritone warm-ups on YouTube. Thanks so much for making those available and everything you do for the vocal community. You're very, very welcome. Yeah. I'm a singer, acoustic guitarist who gigs infrequently. Recently, I've been wondering, how much in advance of a gig should I start my warm-ups? Usually, I warm up 2 to 3 hours before we go on. Other times, it might be more like 3 or 4 hours prior or even earlier. What do you see as the best window for warming up? Is it possible to warm up too early on the day of a show? I really welcome any thoughts and expertise you can share on this. Thanks in advance. And number 2, really quite similar. I use your warm-up videos almost daily. On the day of an evening performance, is there an optimal time to begin warming up? More specifically, should I warm up in the morning and maybe continue exercises throughout the day, or wait until a couple of hours before the performance? So very, very similar. There are some subtleties in each of the questions that I want to dive into. It is worth mentioning, for starters, that it is going to be relative to your experience. And so experimenting with a few different scenarios will hopefully reveal to you patterns that will be fruitful for you as you do more gigs and get into the habit of warming up in a prescribed way. But you have to pay conscious attention to what you're doing that day. For example, using myself as an example, I know that when I have an important performance, I usually like to have something to eat that is very low volume, very light, that's going to keep me energized, but not kind of fill me all up and all that sort of stuff. About 2 to 3 hours prior to the show. And then I will slowly but surely kind of focus. I'm getting my mental game in order in those 2 hours preceding the performance. And then in the final hour, I'm going to begin the process of lightly warming up and getting ready to go. This is, however, an idealized scenario, and not all of us can do that all the time. So let's take another look at the questions and pick it apart just a little bit more. In our first question, wondering how much in advance of a gig should I start my warm-ups? Usually I warm up 2 to 3 hours before we go on. Other times it might be more like 3 to 4 hours prior or even earlier. 3 to 4 hours to me sounds kind of far out. Now, if that's including your mental preparations, I think that's fine. But if you're meaning physical preparations, like warming up your voice and getting your hands ready to go and things like that, my suspicion is that if you start 3 or 4 hours in advance, you're probably going to need to continue that process as you get closer to the time that you're going to be performing. What do you see as the best window for warming up? Is it possible to warm up too early on the day of a show? I already sort of mentioned my idealized scenario. When I think about some of the most fun, exciting, and just great gigs I've ever done, they kind of, they were predicated on some prerequisites. Like there was a green room, so I could be in the green room, and I could be in there for, hours before the show if I wanted to be. I could take my time. I wasn't, generally speaking, disturbed. Or if I was with other people, we were all going to be performing together. And those became almost more fun than the gig because it would be all of us musicians playing songs, warming up, just enjoying one another's company, making music, and kind of not just warming up our instruments, but also just getting kind of the vibe ready to go on stage. I really remember those times extremely fondly, and it wasn't just that it prepared me for the show, it was just really fun and a wonderful experience to be a part of. Our next question, again, has many similarities, but let's pick it apart a little bit. On the day of an evening performance, is there an optimal time to begin warming up? More specifically, should I warm up in the morning and maybe continue exercises throughout the day, or wait until a couple of hours before the performance? Yeah, I think that it sounds, now when I read this comment, it sounded to me as if this individual had already experimented with this. And if you're asking if that sounds like a good scenario, well, I would kind of throw it back to you. If what you're describing here worked well for you, then that works well for you, and that would be something that you could do time and time again, if that works and if you have the time and the sort of space around or within your schedule to do that. If you tried that and it didn't work, then you might try something different. Maybe try my scenario of some type of light but energizing meal, 2.5 hours out, begin your mental preparations then, begin your physical preparations about an hour before you're going to step on stage. See how that works. To me, that kind of just builds momentum as I get ready to move towards the performance time, and that feels really good to me. But it might not to you. You might find that some of it does. Take the parts that work, get rid of what doesn't, replace it with something else, wash, rinse, repeat. See what works, throw away what doesn't, replace it with something new until you find what really works best for you as you get ready to move into your performance practice, your performance for that day or evening or whatever it may happen to be. Love those kinds of questions. Here's our next one. I recall you once said you used the movable do system. Now, for those of you that aren't familiar with this, we're talking about solfege, do, re, mi, fa, sol, la, ti, do. There are two predominant systems in usage, fixed do, where do is always C, or there is movable do, where do is the tonic of whatever key you happen to be in. So if you're in the key of F sharp major, F sharp is do. If you're in the key of D major, D is do. If you're in the fixed do system and you're in the key of G, well, your tonic is so. The only time you're going to have a tonic that is do in fixed do is when you're in the key of C major. I suppose you could say C sharp major, then you'd have do sharp. I don't know that in the fixed do they just call that do. I would think it would be do sharp, which is strictly speaking not do, it's do sharp. Two different pitches, yeah. So does that mean you have two scales in your mind? Major scale interval order and minor scale interval order are not the same. So you need at least two interval patterns, which are then applied to the 12 major and then 12 minor keys. Now, this is close, but this statement's a little bit off the mark because the interval pattern for all major scales is the same. Whole, whole, half, whole, 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 half. And the pattern for minor keys is the same for all 12. So really, you just have to have two interval patterns in mind if you're going to think about it like that. But yeah, major and minor interval patterns as it relates to the intervals within the scales themselves. I suppose with minor keys, you also need to determine whether you're talking about natural minor, harmonic minor, melodic minor, or even another derivative. Thinking about like modal scales, not necessarily additional kinds of minor keys, but anyway, yes, or question, yes. Ignoring the other modes for now. So, since the tonic varies by key, how do you know where you are? Do you just find the key, hit the tonic, and then you know the scale? Or if you know the key, do you look at any note on the page and know what it is? G3 is so in C major, but re in F major. And thus you know where the tonic is and what the scale should sound like. You can do all this on the fly. So going through some of the parts of this again, yes, in a way, I mean, that is one of the things that we learn in the study of scales and music in general. So, for example, do you just find the key, hit the tonic, and then you know the scale? Well, yes, that's the point of relative pitch. That's the point of the movable do system. When we work with a movable do system, what we are learning, what we are training ourselves for is called relative pitch. So, if I am here, this is D major, this is a D major triad. Now I should be oriented to D. There's my tonic, do. Now I know the rest of the scale. Do, re, mi, fa, sol, la, ti, do, so, mi, re, and so on and so forth. That's kind of the point of movable do system, and we can change keys and do it all over again. Usually you have to give yourself a little palate cleanser. I don't know. Do, ti, la, so, fa, mi. Getting kind of low for me. Do. That's the whole point of it, is to be able to develop that skill. It's something that we have to practice. It's not automatic, but it can be learned and practiced, and that's what you're doing. You're learning the relationships between these intervals. Or if you know the key, do you look at any note on the page and know what it is? Well, that sounds like almost being able to read music, and yes, I read music about as fluently as most people. I mean, at least in the major clefs, treble and bass clef, I read without any issues of any kind fluently. I don't really read in the like alto, tenor clefs or the other sort of C clefs that you can use very effectively at all. Those take me a bit of time, and I have to really focus on them to read them with any effectiveness. Cello players, generally speaking, viola players will often be very, very good in reading those clefs. So yeah, I can look at the note on the page and know what note it is. If I don't have a reference pitch though, I wouldn't necessarily be able to sing it. I will often be very, very close, but I don't have absolute pitch. So if I look at a sheet of music and I see that there's an A natural written on there, if you give me an F, then I will know that it's the third. If you give me a D, I will know that it's the fifth. If you give me a G major, then I will know it's re. And yes, all of that we know on the fly. That's part of what the study of music is. Now, it is a study, so we get better with it over time. That's what practice is for. I wasn't, that good at this for a very long time. I've gotten better as I have practiced, as I have been in music for the entirety of my life. Are there those who are better than me at it? Without question. I would consider my music theory and ear training skills to be moderate to advanced at best. Ear training is something that I have always had to focus on and continue to practice in order to stay sharp. There are those who are that have far more advantages than I do in that realm. But I do know that if I practice and I stay on top of it, that I can do very, very well, and my ear training skills serve my needs quite effectively in the work that I do, in the practice that I do, in the teaching that I do, and all that kind of stuff. And what else? And thus you know where the tonic is and what the scale should sound like. Yes. You can do all this on the fly. Yes. That is the point of working with ear training practices and practicing solfege. Emphasize on the word practice. It's a practice, and there will be those who have more advantages and won't have to practice it as much, and there will be those like me who need to practice it more in order to do, like I said, moderately advanced in the practice of ear training oral skills. The reading stuff, though, is not a challenge any longer. I mean, reading notes and reading intervals and things like that, like looking at the written page, is something that long ago became very much second nature to me. I read it like I read, English language out of a book. Number 4, if in the last May exercise there are connectivity problems, i.e. rough transitions, how do I assess and correct? What work should I do to correct? Thank you. I think that this might be related to an additional question that we had. So I'm going to skip over here to 6. Whenever I go from now, in the IPA, that would be A to ah, but if you look at the example they gave, I am tempted to add Y sound, so it ends up being to yay. Now I would normally pronounce that A to yay, but what I think they mean is E, yay. So I think the vowels that they're referring to are E and A, but in the IPA, the letter E there that you see would really be an A sound. Is this wrong to do? And if so, do you have any tips on how to avoid it? In each of these questions, my suspicion is that in the may syllable from question number 4, and in this E to A, you're hearing a Y sound, and there's a Y sound at the end of the may syllable. And it is quite likely that there's some additional tongue tension that is getting created, and it's either keeping the tongue from adjusting accurately, or the tongue is overcorrecting and then returning to a position that's better for the formation of that vowel. So when we sing may, 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 we could emphasize the diphthong, that change from the A into the Y. May, 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 may. And that is going to create more space between them. When you sing the syllable, try to notice the position of the rear of the tongue. You will feel it if you can direct your attention to the rear of the oral cavity. You can feel the tongue kind of lifted towards the roof of the mouth. And when you change syllables, it's going to want to drop and come back up. Try to keep it higher in the rear of the oral cavity. May, 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 may. And the same would be true for E going to A. When we are first working on that transition, it is quite likely that the tongue will drop a lot. Or it can be very tense in the rear tongue mass. See if you can keep it lifted towards the roof of the mouth. It's not touching, but it's in that direction. And it's not that we want to hold it taut. You may feel some additional muscle tension initially. Try to keep it loose but lifted. And go seamlessly between those vowels. You may find that initially you have to take more time as you make your way from one vowel to the next. It might sound a little blurry. That's okay. With practice, you'll have both the tongue remaining in its position. It will be looser and more released, which will help with overall resonance and color in your voice. And you'll get faster on the transition too. Just be patient with yourself and see if you can, focus on one of those things at a time. Do the blurred transitions and then switch gears. Do the practice where you're consciously keeping the tongue lifted, and maybe it's got a little bit extra tongue tension for a brief few minutes there, and then try to put the two together. I know I went out of order here. Let's go back to question number 5. Do passaggios, and I think that's generally passaggi, but I'm not exactly sure because I don't really speak Italian fluently. or at all, tend to change with training, specifically increasing. People around me agree that I'm a high bass, but I currently have a profundo first passaggio and am between lyric bass and profundo on the second. Will this shift as I improve? I'm still quite new to singing. If you're new to singing, then I would give yourself some time. Your registration event positions, the passaggio points, will settle in as your vowel alignment and the overall usage of your body and your voice becomes more acute. As your vowel alignment becomes more balanced, as it becomes more precise, as the differences between vowels gets resolved and you find that you have better overall phonation and coordination of the flow of air and the vocal mechanism here, then the passaggio points will settle down. It sounds like if you're really new to singing, people have placed some labels on you prematurely. I would caution you against buying into it too heavily. In the words of Richard Miller, until you can sing seamlessly over the secondo passaggio, it's really inappropriate to start labeling one with vocal range designations with Fox. In other words, until you're fluidly going back and forth between the various registers and you have balanced tone production across them all, it's all premature and it's all kind of guesswork. I think that's a little bit drastic, though who am I to question the great Richard Miller? I think that we generally get inklings and indications of how the voice is going to develop as we get better vowel alignment, as the apagio breath management system starts to really help engage with the voice, and as coordination of the mechanism improves. All of those things have to be in place before the passaggio points are going to settle in. And those points, along with the overall tessitura that you can cover, and along with the kind of feelings that you have about certain ranges of your voice, yeah, that's considered as part of your vocal range designation too. Do you like singing low? Does it feel good? Do you sound rich and resonant? Or do you favor this middle zone and the kind of colorations that you can evoke when you're in that area? Those are all a part of learning your FOC, your vocal range designation. Now, to be very direct, especially when it pertains to the secondo passaggio, for many vocalists, particularly male vocalists or those whose voices are influenced by testosterone, the primo passaggio will be sung past without much thought. Most people won't even notice it or know that it's there. For that matter, there's another passaggio point below that, and most of us don't notice that at all. The secondo passaggio is the one that most of us focus on. And it's that one that you will notice the greatest kind of fluctuation as your technique changes, as you learn about apagio, as you learn about vowel modification, as the coordination of airflow and vocal fold adduction is closure of the vocal mechanism, improves and becomes more efficient so that you're using not too much nor too little pressure at the vocal fold. That passaggio point, that secondo passaggio, can appear to shift position. It kind of does and it kind of doesn't. Ultimately, it's a physical attribute of our system. And when we use the system in the most efficient manner, the passaggio point, the secondo passaggio, will stay in one place. But as you make adjustments to the way that you are using the mechanisms, it can feel like it shifts back and forth. So if I'm singing here, and I'm going for a balanced tone production, I know that my secondo passaggio kind of tip over point is going to be right around this area right here, right around F4, F sharp 4. That's where it's going to be. But I also know that if I want to have a particularly airy sound, like I want to have that kind of contemporary pop thing in the upper register where it's going to be, I'm going to lose a lot of air. And I also know that my voice is going to want to tip over that tipping point into my upper register into my cricothyroid dominant singing voice, which in this configuration one would justifiably call falsetto, it's going to feel like it's a bit earlier. I'm not using the system as efficiently. Case in point, let's say you drive a vehicle, and let's say that it has 6 gears, and you drive a journey and it uses 1 tank of fuel. If you use all those gears appropriately on the journey, then you will have traveled as far as you possibly can on that 1 tank of fuel. But let's say you took the gear selector, or if you drive a manual, you left it in 1st gear. And despite the fact that you're only in 1st gear, when you're on the motorway or highway, you still went 55 miles per hour. Now, aside from the fact that would probably burn up your engine, you would go through fuel far more rapidly. You would lose that fuel, you would not be as efficient. The same is true for our voices. If we, elect to do the airy voice, we're going to burn up our air much more quickly. We're going to go through it. We're not going to have the length of phrase. We're not going to get the distance. Going only in 1st gear in that car, you're not going to be able to make that whole 200-mile journey. You're going to get cut short running out of that tank of gas. So Passaggio points settle in over time. They can appear to shift depending on the efficiency with which we use our voices. But if you're new to singing, give yourself some time. Avoid applying labels to yourself until you've had time to work on your vowel alignment, Passaggio breath management, and your registration event practice. And that's it for another really fun Questions from Comments 35. Thank you so much. I love the questions. If you've got more, they go in the comments and I can have a look and get them into Questions from Comments 36. Thank you again if you've chosen to subscribe, and if you haven't yet, I hope you'll do so now. There are many ways you can support my channel. Those are in the description. They include the all new and improved jeffrolka.com, where you can find courses and things like that, or become a part of the RVC, Rolka's vocal community, where you can even post questions to me and I can answer them. You can even post audio or video if you like. Anyways, have a great day. Take really good care of your voices. Enjoy singing, and hopefully we will see you again.